since we have a nice small group, and I'm not sure, Jim, if this is a possibility, but if we could just quickly start with, it will be helpful for me when we're talking about all of these different approaches if I have a bit of an understanding of the ages of your children. And so if we could just quickly, since there are there are only 7 or 8 of you, if we could we open the mics just to hear everybody's age of everybody's kids or no?
The mics are open.
Age 9.
15.
9, 10, and
16.
18, 16.
Mine is 3.
3.
7.
Okay.
7.
Great. Well, that helps me. It sounds like we have now. If you could close that so I don't hear out the ages of your children. I think I can try to target what we're going to do. I am combined, if you've looked at the handouts that you received, I've combined the handouts that we had from the previous talk and have added some from other discussions in order to hopefully make a good comprehensive discussion and presentation here. As Jim said, I'm happy to share these with you, and I hope that they're helpful. So the first thing that I'd like to do is to make sure that, well, now my PowerPoint is not working. Okay. Is to talk about the goals of and an overview of the presentation. So first and foremost, we're going to have a brief overview of basic behavior theory, because it's important to understand where I'm coming from and why we have the particular approaches that we do. We're going to talk about addressing the antecedents and increasing prevention strategies. Then we're going to move into what do we do when things go wrong, and then certainly time for some questions. Now, having said that, I'm a teacher, obviously, and I'm used to people asking me questions as we go. It's more important for me that you, rather than wait to the end, if you have a question about anything that I'm talking about or how it relates, please don't be afraid to ask. This is what I'm here for, and I hope that I can be helpful. Now, having said that, if I feel like it's something that I'm going to discuss or cover later on in the presentation, or it makes more sense if we talk about it later, I'll just say that. But please, if you have a question, ask it when you have it, okay? And I think those go to Jim, but I certainly don't mind somebody popping in or asking a question about that. All right? Okay. So the first thing that we're going to talk about are these basic building blocks of understanding behavior, and these are called the ABCs of behavior. So if we look at any kind of behavior, and part of examining behavior, oftentimes you will hear somebody talk about a functional assessment or a functional behavioral assessment. Really what they're looking at that point is the antecedent, or the action that occurs directly before the behavior itself, and then the consequence. So we're going to talk about this in some depth so that we really understand how this works, because this is how all behavior occurs. Having said that, we'll talk about the variations and what we see with our boys about how these might differ. So the antecedent is, as I said, the event preceding the behavior. The antecedent is the most important part of addressing any kind of a behavioral plan or changing any kind of behavior. First, we have to really understand what that antecedent is, and then we need to see how we can address the antecedent. Now, that in and of itself is a shift from other typical behavior plans. So oftentimes what happens is someone will say, what is the, what do I do when he does this? Okay, so, and that's part of the temper tantrum thing. So what do I do when he bites? Okay, or what do I do when he throws himself on the ground? Or what do I do when he swears or he won't pick up his clothes or something like that? We are going to talk about what you can do when that happens, because that will continue, there will be some times when that continues to happen, even if we change and address the antecedent. But most of our work and most of our discussion is going to be on addressing the antecedent. So what do we do so we don't have to get to the consequence? So what are we going to do? Look at why the behavior occurs, what that antecedent is, how do we modify those antecedents so that the behavior itself doesn't occur. Now, in the picture that you're looking at here, it looks like there's a guy with, holding things over his ears because there was a loud sound and perhaps that was disruptive to him. So I hear the loud sound, I put my hands over my ears, or somebody takes my toy away, and so I push the kid. Those are easy antecedents to understand. If we see something, oh, well, of course he was upset, somebody took his toy away, and so of course he, bit the other kid, or he doesn't like to do his homework, and so he lashed out at me, or he slammed the door, or he threw his books on the floor, or whatever those kinds of things might be. The other thing to take into account is that sometimes the antecedent is something a little bit more organic, like anxiety, like fatigue, particularly with our guys thinking about those physiological things that come with the ebb and flow of testosterone, thinking about the emotional kind of profile with a little bit of anxiety, thinking about the learning disabilities and the frustration that can come with some of that. And so it's sometimes it's an external thing and we can see it really, really clearly. Sometimes it's something that's a little bit more internal, and that's something that is unique to populations that have neurodevelopmental disorders or some learning disabilities, delays, etc. So I hope that makes sense. We're going to go on to the next one. So the behavior is the action that happens due to the antecedent. Now, there are lots of things that we would think that this would be the easiest thing to describe and to understand. However, when we talk about changing behavior, we need to be really clear about the behavior that we want to change. So sometimes we have families that will say, or teachers that will say, well, I want him to be less aggressive, okay? I don't want him to be aggressive. I don't want him to be disrespectful, okay? Being disrespectful is a construct, okay? That is something that is a concept or a group of behaviors that are clumped under one big umbrella or construct. Behaviors need to be things that we can see, and they need to be specific. So biting is a behavior. Kicking is a behavior. Saying I hate you is a behavior. Swearing, behavior. Okay. Being disrespectful is, again, more of a construct. There are lots of different things that are in there. And we need to be really clear about what behaviors we're trying to change and what behaviors we're going to ignore, we're going to put on the back burner for different times. I think it's also important that this is the other thing. When we start talking about changing the behavior, we're talking about this today in one of my classes where someone said, well, I want him to stop chewing on his shirt. Okay, so what are we going to do when he chews on his shirt? Well, we're not going to have a consequence for chewing on the shirt. We're actually going to go back to the etiology part of that. Oops, or the I don't know why this isn't working. It's going the wrong way. We're going to go back to the antecedent and say it's not that I want him to I'd like for him to stop chewing on his shirt. However, the main thing is that I need for his oral motor needs to be met in a different way, because if I meet those oral motor needs, then we won't be having the chewing on the shirt kinds of behaviors that we're seeing right now. Okay? All right, so the last thing is the consequence. So what happens after the behavior? Now, sometimes this picture shows, the kid getting in trouble or getting scolded or whatever. There, again, we have to think, because of the kids that we have, that there are two aspects of this. One is the external thing. So what is, what's reinforcing about it from an external perspective? Do they get attention? Do they get, are they able to escape something? We're going to talk about the functions of behavior in a minute. But the other thing is that sometimes the consequence is related to the action itself, and it's an internally reinforcing action. So let me give you an example. So it's one thing if I push somebody off of a swing and then I get to swing. Okay, so the consequence there is I did this thing and then I got to swing. And then maybe I get put in timeout, so there's a consequence for the pushing. If they're close enough linked, maybe I can make that case in my brain. However, let's think about a kid that has ADHD and needs to move. Okay, so I'm sitting in my chair and the teacher says, it's not time to get up, you need to sit down, you need to stay sitting down, you need to stay at circle, you need to do whatever it is. You're sitting, and your body is telling you it's time to move. Okay, it's been 20 minutes, it's 25 minutes, and all that your body is saying is, I need to move, I need to move, I need to move, I need to move. When I get up, okay, and move, finally, I get up, I leave circle time, I run around the room, whatever I do, and then I go immediately into timeout. The consequence, you would say, well, the consequence is he went in timeout, and the teacher's very consistent, and I'm very consistent, and I don't understand why this isn't working. However, what really the consequence of that is that the kid got to get up. So the reinforcing aspect was, it was internally reinforcing, even though there was an external kind of consequence that was negative. Once I get up, it's so reinforcing to my body that no matter what, I'll take the hit later, not physical hit, but I mean an emotional, I don't get a star, I don't get to do what I want to do, as long as I got to get up and move. So there you're battling this. You have to figure out, is it internally or externally reinforcing? Because one of the things that we know about behavior, regardless of any behavior, is that behavior does not continue unless it's somehow reinforcing. So I'm going to say that again because it's really, really important. Behavior does not occur unless it's somehow reinforcing. And so if we have a behavior that we say, gosh, we are so consistent, okay? And the kid is, we've looked at the purpose of the behavior, and we're going to talk about these 4 things in just a second, but, we've addressed the antecedent, this behavior continues to occur. We need to look at, is it internally reinforcing? Sometimes biting is a really hard thing to stop. And part of that reason is that it's such a dramatic, you get such a dramatic, quick reaction. It's hard to ignore biting, and you get it, if you bite someone, they go, very, very, very quickly. What also happens is that there are really strong proprioceptors in our jaws, and if you've got a sensory processing issue and you bite down on someone, you get that immediate deep feedback in through those proprioceptors in your jaw. And so we try to get kids to, we try to interfere before they can actually get the bite off, if that makes sense. So if you can get them before they actually bite, it never is reinforcing. Okay? So when we talk about all behavior serves a purpose, we want to think about what the goal is behind that behavior. So is the goal there to maintain, I do something because I want to keep doing. uh, I like this. I want to keep doing it. It's really important. I want to do this again. That's maintaining. Now, if I want to avoid a behavior, then we have to really understand why somebody would. Okay, so if I'm doing, if kid is doing his homework, let's say, and we get to math, and the child says, well, I don't want to do my math. I don't like my math. And the mom says, you know, you have to do your math, whatever. And the kid says, well, you know, I hate you, you know, you're stupid, whatever. And so then they say, oh, we don't tolerate that. It's disrespectful. You go in your room. Okay? Well, yay. Then you say, well, that was a consequence. We do it every single time. He's punished. He doesn't like to go to his room, whatever. Actually, it was reinforcing because I avoided having to do my math. Okay? Even if it was momentarily, I avoided my math. The same kind of thing with escaping. Okay, I want out of here. You know, lots of guys have trouble in, you know, kind of high pressure, high anxiety kinds of things. You would think, well, this is going to be a fun thing. I don't know why he wouldn't want to be here. This doesn't make any sense. He's looked forward to this for forever, and then he threw a great big fit and then had to leave. Well, that's reinforcing because actually it's too much for me anyway, and I don't care if I don't get to do this as long as I don't have to be here. Again, sometimes that happens with kids. You know, we use timeout, and timeout is not a good consequence or punishment for any kind of behavior that the purpose of the behavior is to avoid or escape. Because even though it may be you come back to it momentarily, if it's so hard, you know, I'm talking about some of those homework kinds of things, it's so hard, I don't care if it takes, you know, if I have to go into timeout or miss my stuff, as long as I don't have to do this right now because it's so hard for me. The last thing is for attention. So if you've got somebody that's doing behavior and you engage in a lot of discussion. Now sometimes discussion can also be a means for avoiding. So I'm going to get you off topic and start, you know, throwing a fit or talking about something else and arguing with you. Again, I've delayed the math instead of making sure that I'm staying on task. So the reason why I spend so much time talking about these basic building blocks is that we really need to understand them in order to have good behavior plans and in order to deal with the behavior in an appropriate way. So if I've got a kid who is arguing because he has low blood sugar, that's one thing. If I've got a kid who's arguing because he likes attention, that's another thing. If I've got a kid who's arguing because he's trying to avoid something, that's very, very different. So all of those, the arguing in and of itself is very clear, very consistent, very noticeable and measurable kind of a behavior. But understanding the purpose that that behavior serves will determine A, how we treat that antecedent, and B, what kind of consequence we use in order to decrease the frequency of the behavior when we still have some of those leftover behaviors, even if we've addressed the antecedent to the best of our abilities. I hope that it's really hard for me not to see anybody, so I hope you're shaking your heads or something. All right. Whenever I talk about behavior, and somebody will say, I want you to create a behavior plan, or I want to change this behavior for my child. I want to make sure that I'm not sweating the little stuff. So these are the 5 things that I ask parents or myself before I start to engage in changing behavior, because changing behavior, it can be hard. It's not easy. And those of you that have engaged in behavior plans and tried these different things we know that it takes a lot of energy. So the first thing is it disruptive to either the home or school environment? Okay, number 2, does it interfere with the child's ability to learn? Does it interfere with others' ability to learn? Does it present a danger to self or others? And does it interfere with social acceptance? So one of the things that's really important for anybody that has even the mildest of learning disabilities or something like that is that our goal is for our kids to have, to be as functional as they possibly can be and as successful as they possibly can be within within society. And so, although sometimes we think, well, you know, I don't want to be silly. We've got bigger fish to fry. You know, I guess I shouldn't worry too much if that looks silly or doesn't look silly. Well, certainly, you know, if something's a danger to somebody or they interfere with their ability to learn, it's something worth changing the behavior. But we also really want to think about social acceptance. We want these kids to feel good about themselves, and we want other kids to feel good about being with them because it has such a profound effect on everything else that they do. So we do have that. I do have that in there, and I do think about that when it's time to think about changing behavior. All right. Some of the things that impact behavior are the following things, and I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about how these things might impact behavior, but I think that you can start to see that if you have, let's say, a speech and language delay, that's pretty obvious. If I can't communicate, I'm going to use physical means. If I can't understand people, I might get physical, I might get frustrated. All of those things are clear around communication. If I have issues with learning and the tasks that are being asked of me at school are really tricky, and then I might get frustrated, and then again I'm going to use any kind of behavior to get out or to escape from that kind of environment. Now, it is important in this population in particular to look at gross and fine motor delays and physical ailments because they do have, and particularly again with this group of, you know, sometimes at different times in their lives they might have different physical things that are associated with their diagnosis, and then we also have gross and fine motor delays associated as well. Now, fine motor delays, we oftentimes are really clear that, particularly in school, that someone might get frustrated with, I can't write my name, or this is so taxing for my system to be able to complete things like coloring and drawing all the way up to writing big papers, okay? I think it's important as well, particularly we're dealing with a male population here, and we want to think about how important gross motor skills are, particularly during unstructured and recessed kinds of play. So when we look at social hierarchies within the elementary school group and the middle school group, a lot of kids put a lot of emphasis on, you know, what goes on at recess and who gets picked first and second and third and fourth, and if you don't get picked, or you all those things for different sides of basketball or football or whatever it is that they're playing during those times. And the reason why I bring this up is because we do oftentimes see more difficulty with behavior around unstructured times. This doesn't mean that school's out. You know, it's still school time. And we need to make sure that we're addressing what our child's needs are during those times, having some additional, either at least recognizing that that can happen, how to deal with it, and being proactive around trying to provide the child with resources so that they are not bullied or even worse, sometimes ignored. All right, keep going here. So these characteristics need to be understood but can't be used as an excuse for inappropriate behavior. So when we look at our guys and we think about, oh, poor poor you, and it is tough, and I understand you don't feel well, and I understand that these guys are, the school is hard, and all of these kinds of things. Again, the issue that we have, it's not that learning disabilities or anything like that are typically the things that keep our kids out of, or any child actually with special needs, out of a fully integrated classroom or keep them out of social circles. It's inappropriate behavior. So it's not IQ, it's behavior. So we want to make sure that we address the behaviors as soon as possible so that it doesn't exclude them further. So we talked about a little bit about a functional assessment in the first slide on the ABCs. When someone asks you, or when someone will talk to you about, well, we really got to address this behavior, or you bring the behavior up to someone else and say, goodness gracious, the thing that's making us crazy is throwing himself on the floor. I mean, I can't get over the tantrums, I can't, the outbursts, the slamming doors, or whatever it is that you're talking about. The first thing, okay, the first thing, not the later down the road, rather than saying, what should I do when he does this, the first thing that we need to do is to understand the operational definition of the behavior. So we need to know when, where, and how often this behavior occurs. We need to, because the pattern for who it happens with, when it happens, why it, what the child does is the basis for our understanding of the function of the behavior. So sometimes we jump to a conclusion that is inaccurate, and we treat the behavior, we treat the wrong antecedent, and then the behavior doesn't change. So for instance, let's say that we've got a kid and we say, oh my goodness, he's horrible in math. I mean, goodness gracious, he's rude, he won't do his work, he flicks his pen around, he pokes the people around him, he is just, he's a pistol. It's just ridiculous during this time. Now, what that could be is that he's trying to avoid math because math is hard. And we might jump to that conclusion. However, if we wanted to look at his entire day, we might say, well, gosh, when he brings his math homework home, he's not naughty. It's not. He does it for me. Okay. So, is it math? Maybe, maybe not. We would have to look at the time of day. Okay, well, he does his homework for me with math. That doesn't seem to be the problem. When we see a problem is, right before lunch, because he's got low blood sugar. He's not able to maintain that very well. He's not a great communicator with us, and so he ends up getting pretty irritable, and that's when we really see those behavior problems. Oh, you take that back. You know what? Math is right before lunch. What about if we change something as easy, and this is literally an example that I've worked with on more than one occasion. Oh, well, let's infuse a snack here. Or, you know what, it's not the math and it's not a snack. He actually is paired with a kid that bugs him the whole time during that class, and nobody else is seeing that. And so, or he's right by the window and he is so ridiculously distracted that, we need to change the seat. So really understand. Now, sometimes it is math, and then we need to look at how we're dealing with that. But that is the example of making sure that we have really gone to a good functional analysis. When we try, the reason is that going through changing the behavior is not only time-consuming and difficult for you as parents and teachers as well, but it's not fair to the kid. And so we want to be timely, and we want to make sure that we are addressing the actual root and the cause and the function of the behavior. Yeah, I think we'll stop with that right there. Is there, I don't know, is there a way for you to tell me if you understand this, if this makes sense? Is there any way to make sure that people are kind of all on the same page Can we open mics for a few minutes and just at least make sure that you understand what I'm talking about thus far? No?
I'm opening mics now.
Okay. Okay. Does this, so far, does this make sense?
Yes, it makes
Yep.
sense.
Okay, okay. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to pop in here, and if I need to clarify something about those foundations, then this is the time to do it. No? No? Okay. All right. The next thing is, then you can close the mics because then I won't have the feedback. Thanks. The thing that I tell the graduate students all the time is that if you battle against biology, you'll lose. So the idea that if you are trying to, not dissimilar to what I talked about the chewing on the shirt. So if I have a kid who has sensory issues and he's got to get more feedback in through his mouth, and I just try to, I'm pretty good at changing behavior, okay? I've been doing it for a really, really long time, and so I can change his behavior. I can stop him from chewing on his shirt. But if I don't address the need there, the etiology, the biological function of that behavior, so if I don't give him the oral input that he needs in another way, he'll stop chewing his shirt. He'll chew his sleeve. He'll suck his thumb. He'll put other things in his mouth. So the same thing holds with things like kicking. Okay, so if somebody is kicking or swearing, I can change that. So can you. We can teach you to change that. But another behavior will arise if we haven't dealt with the antecedent of that behavior, if we haven't addressed the root cause and the biology. So I can't sticker chart these kids out of having a learning disability. I can't do that, okay? I can give a lot of, my goal here is to give enough support so that the frustration doesn't get to a boiling point and the child exhibits a behavior. I can do that. That addresses the antecedent. But I can't sticker chart somebody into being able to see any better. I can't sticker chart somebody into being able to sit still longer. Okay? So it really is the idea that if you battle against the biology, you will lose. Okay? So our job is to understand what the makeup of the child is internally and biologically, and then where there are gaps, it's our job to say whatever is missing internally, we need to provide that externally. So if the child is disorganized internally, maybe they have ADHD, maybe they have sensory issues, then we need to provide more structure outside. Sometimes that seems to go contrary to what we might think. Okay, well, this kid is kind of disorganized. He's a free spirit, you know. He needs less structure and fewer rules. Absolutely not. Those kids need more structure, not more rules necessarily, but clearer rules, very clear expectations, predictability, because the more internally disorganized I am, the more external structure I need. Okay? All right. So we're going to move into the kind of behavior plan world here. And the idea of understanding what I just said translates into this. So why do most behavior plans fail? And this is kind of a consumer guide to understanding behavior plans, so that if you're in a situation where someone wants to say, well, in order to deal with his temper tantrums, we're going to do this. In order to deal with these outbursts, this is our behavior plan. The first thing is that you want to look for is, do they assume that the behavior occurs in isolation? So what I mean by that is I did tell you that we want to pick a behavior. It is important to isolate the behavior. But that doesn't mean that the behavior itself should be isolated from the rest of the organism, if you will. So we need to understand that behavior, as previously discussed, is a function of, can be a function of of health, can be a function of speech and language delay, can be a function of learning issues, can be a function of anxiety. So all of those things, we need to understand that behavior does not occur in isolation. So if you've got somebody that's not addressing the whole child as part of the behavior plan is probably not going to work. So the behavior plan needs to be holistic. That's that second one. The next thing that is also occurs that is something to be, particularly for those of you who have kids who are 18 and 21 or a little bit older, we want to change up the kind of how we modify their behavior. And you know, cash rewards and working for those kinds of rewards can be very effective, okay? However, you want to be careful about how those are set up. I have literally seen behavior plans that are set up of, okay, if you can do get every time that you go an hour without an outburst, you get a star, and so if you get 5 stars in a day, you earn a token, and you can turn in your tokens for if you get 5 tokens, then you can turn them in for $1, and then if you save up enough dollars, you can play on the computer for, you know, 30 minutes. I mean, for goodness sake, nobody can remember what that was and why they did it, and, you know, all of those kinds of things. So working for long-term rewards are great for some of the older kids, but they need to be clear, they need to be attainable, and they need to not be too complicated, or else everybody forgets what they're doing and they're not successful. Oops, I think I touched the wrong thing here. And then the last thing is that they don't address the foundations of the behavior. So if they are primarily focused on the consequence and there is not any attempt to address the antecedent, be that an external antecedent or an external antecedent, then the behavior won't work. Because like I said, you can change, we'll change abiding, but something else will occur instead. All right, so I'm going to go through a couple of these things. I know that you all posted the narrative that I talked about developing a behavior plan to your website. So we'll go through this rather quickly, but I think it is important. When I think about changing behavior and addressing behavior, this is how I look at it, and when we get to the consequences about, you know, what happens when, that's when we'll start talking about how to deal with these things once they do occur. So identify one specific behavior to target. We talked about this already. Determine when, where, and how often that behavior occurs. So this is that functional analysis, which is crucial to us understanding the functional the function of the behavior. The next thing is to examine and address any physiological causes. So for us, again, that's really, really big. If their systems, hormonally, etc., are not in sync, okay, it's crazy to try to change behavior until we get that other stuff under control, because talk about battling biology, we're really going to lose on that one. The next thing is to examine and modify the structure of the situation when possible to decrease the opportunity for the behavior to occur. So one of the things that's it sounds a little contrary, but it's actually true when you think about it, is that it's always easier to change the structure or the routine or something like that than it is to change the child. So let's say that back to the math in the morning or the math right before lunch. If you've got a kid and, you know, they're so distractible that they can't, you know, pay attention, you can keep saying, pay attention, hey, look over here, hey, when you look at me, you're going to get a sticker, or you're going to be in timeout when you don't, or whatever it is that we're going to do around that. But if you just simply change the setup of the room or move the child, those are easy things. Same things with our younger kids around, like lining up. Okay, he pokes people, he leans on people, he, you know, okay, well, you know, I can fight a great big huge battle. I can create a behavior plan so he does not poke anybody. But here's another thing that I could do. I can have him be the line leader so he doesn't have an opportunity to poke anybody. That's a lot simpler than creating a whole behavior plan over something that can be addressed via structure. Okay. Oh wow, he's math is his worst subject. It's really hard for him. Is there any way that we can do math first thing in the morning instead of right before lunch? That's a pretty easy fix. Okay, so those are things that are really important. Provide the child with additional resources for dealing with the stressors associated with behavior. So again, if the child, let's say, additional resources may be external or internal or even medication kinds of things. So we're making sure that the child has everything he or she needs, he in these cases, to deal with these kinds of stressors. So if the sensory stuff is too much, let's make sure they have headphones. Let's make sure that the child has got OT if they need it. Let's talk about if it's a language issue and the child is gets anxious and isn't able to communicate effectively, and so we get into this anger and frustration and those kinds of things. Let's talk about social skills groups. Let's talk about giving kind of trainings around what words to use, packed phrases. If language is so delayed, which we typically don't have in this group, but then what about other ways to communicate? So the next thing is to outline natural consequences for the behavior. Now let's think about it. Back to the behavior plan thing, is that we've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things before we start talking about consequences. This is a front-end loaded behavior plan. This is not something that again, the first thing that we talk about is what are we going to do, when are we going to use timeout, what are we going to do when this behavior occurs. We're going to try to deal as much as we can with the antecedent. Then we're going to talk about natural consequences. We want to be consistent, and then we want to provide a substitute behavior. It is really important that we don't take anything away. Remember, all behavior serves a purpose. So if I take something away, I want to really substitute it with something that's positive. So I say, well, I don't want him. I don't want him to do punch people anymore. Well, of course we don't want him to punch people anymore. But what I really want, what I really want is for him to be able to effectively communicate his frustration verbally. I want him to stop slamming doors. What I actually want him to do is to be able to control, regulate his system a little bit better, and for him to leave a situation without becoming violent. So do you see what I mean about providing those substitute behaviors that are more in line with what we want the child to do? We want to reinforce. Yep.
I have a question from one of the participants here. Jennifer asks, would you please give some situational examples that relate to teenagers, such as breaking things?
Okay. So if you, in this particular instance, if I've got somebody, if I say I want the child to stop breaking things, or I guess they're not children anymore, right? So I don't know if we would still call them children, but whatever. So we don't want this young man to break things anymore. Again, the positive aspect of that, I don't know, oh, here we go. So when we go back to this, we need to understand, so breaking things is the targeted behavior, that's what we don't want the young man to do. We want to understand when, where, and how often that behavior occurs. When's the breaking happening? So is it out of anger? Is it out of frustration? Is it, I get backed into a corner, I can't come up with the right answer for you, I get caught lying or something like that. So when are we seeing that breaking things, when is it happening? Then we want to address any physiological causes. So does the breaking occur because he can't hear, can't see. We've got an imbalance there hormonally. Want to take care of that stuff first. But then we want to think about, this is a good one for the examining and modifying the structure of the situation when possible to decrease the opportunity for the behavior to occur. So when somebody breaks something dramatically in front of you, that you oftentimes have a pretty dramatic reaction. So part of the thing may be us thinking about modifying the environment, keeping, having discussions, or when we're like, when, where, and how often does this happen? If I'm going to get on him about something and have a tough conversation that I think is going to be explosive, I'm going to make sure that I do that in a place where there aren't things handy that he can break, or we're going to do that in this room where, the next thing is we're just going to shut the door and there is nothing else to break. Some things like that, that we're actually modifying where and when to decrease the opportunity, because if I can't get that reinforcing quality about the breaking. So is it that I like the sound, it's pretty dramatic, do I like it, what's reinforcing about it, does it then take the pressure off of what we were talking about before? So I'm talking to you about curfew, you know what I mean, you were late, I told you, if you aren't here on time, you need to, we're going to decrease the thing, and you say, hey, you know what, I hate you, and you throw the thing down and break something. Hey, why are you breaking that? Okay, as soon as the breaking happens, we've shifted our attention onto breaking rather than talking about curfew or getting a job or whatever it is that I'm doing. So we need to understand, back to probably one of the most critical aspects of changing behavior really is this second thing here of determining when, where, and how often, because that is the functional aspect of it. What is it that the child or the child is getting out of this? What is why is it continuing? So again, behavior that's not somehow reinforcing, okay, doesn't continue. So what's the reinforcing quality about breaking these things? Does it momentarily get us off of this? Is it, do I like the sound? Does it, who knows? That only way I know right now, and you may know, but is to determine this, and then to also understand what happens after. What's the consequence? What am I doing now? What's he doing now? And then what happens after that? Okay, and then the providing the substitute behavior. So rather than when he's upset or when he's not upset, is when you want to talk about what we're going to do instead. So, here's the consequence for you. Breaking things, they're gone. You have to pay for them, you have to clean it up, whatever it is that we decide is appropriate. Consistency about that. But then when things are calm and we have an opportunity to talk about it, what is the substitute behavior? So he has to be, we have to get in tune with, and this is very difficult. I hope I'm not making this sound like, oh yeah, just sit down and figure this out really, really quickly. It does take time, and sometimes it takes somebody that's an external person to help us kind of see what's going on here in the patterns. But the substitute behavior would be, maybe we're the ones that are, the argument is going on too long, okay? And sometimes, as parents, I'm a parent of teenagers myself, that I'm still so angry and I'm, kind of pushing too much. My kids don't have a language delay and don't have any anxiety, okay? So they can say, I do not want to talk about this anymore, okay? I oftentimes can hear that shift, okay, where I've pushed and talked about this issue too much right then. And it's a good thing for me to say, okay, you know what, we are going to talk about it again, but I hear that you don't want to talk about it right now. Okay, teaching our boys some of those strategies to be able to say, I am done for now, okay, it's too much for me. Sometimes what happens is, instead of, I can't get out those words, or maybe I don't things are escalating. I can't figure out how to end this well, so I break something, slam the door, get violent, okay? And then things do stop, okay? They didn't stop in a good way, but they did stop. It's the same thing like I said about, you know, when your body's saying get up, get up, get up, get up. The overriding drive there is to get up out of my chair. I get up out of the chair and I still get in trouble. So even though I broke something, I'm still going to get in trouble. But what it did was temporarily stop something that I couldn't figure out how to stop before. So I'm not sure if that addressed the issue completely, but hopefully that's a little better example for that particular age group.
I'm not certain if I understood the comment accurately, but Jennifer adds that breaking things actually makes him feel better.
Yeah. Can you say more?
Give me a moment. I'm going to open her microphone. Okay, Jennifer, okay. Your mic is open.
Okay.
Jennifer, your mic is open.
Okay, thank you. Yes, he becomes what generally, it can be anything that causes him frustration, whether he's playing a video game, whether he's just hanging out with his brother, whether he's he's playing baseball, or anything relating to school, or, you know, cleaning up. It doesn't matter what, anything that causes him frustration, that's kind of, that and his very bad language are his go-tos. And when he does break something, he says he feels better, and then he calms back down and he's over it, just like that.
Okay. So it's kind of a release, is what he's saying, is that, you know, he gets so frustrated and kind of this buildup of anger that the release is and I have had people say this before, you know, that, you know, I threw it against the wall and I felt better. I hit something and I felt better. There are a couple of things that we want to do and that have worked well with that and this is part of this back here at the providing the child with the additional resources for dealing with the stresses associated with it. So part of that is understanding and how old did you say he was, 18? Is he 18? Okay, I don't know, I guess the mics aren't open, so I'm just going to go with...
He's 15.
He's 15. 15.
16.
Okay. 16.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the thing with that, and good, he's a little bit younger, so there's time to change with that. The problem is that, you know, you do need to go through all these other things. So I would ask about these other issues that you've looked at. So modifying the things so you've said everything makes him frustrated. When parents, and I'm not saying that you're not right, okay? I'm not saying that you're not accurate, but what we have to do is go back to this determining when, where, and how often this behavior occurs, and try to narrow it down a little bit so that we can tag some of the things of what are exacerbating the behaviors and exacerbating the frustration. So when it's playing with his brother, around what kinds of things? Okay, so are there any things that he can do, and you don't have to answer these, I'm just talking about what I would do if I were working with you around some of this. So you know, when does it not occur? So when are the times that how long can he do something before he becomes frustrated? So sometimes that it's not the act itself, but it's the time or the duration. So the kid gets a little, well, they can play pretty well together for about 30 minutes, but gosh, you know, when it gets closer to an hour, these guys, you know, then I know that something's going to break loose. Or they're always successful for 30 minutes, but, you know, it's touch and go after that. Then you can start to modify that. Well, you know what, then I'm going to step in just for a while to be successful and stop those activities before, you know, at 30 minutes so we don't get to that frustration level. The other thing is, for somebody that's his age, I would certainly be making sure that we've got all of these things addressed. So everything is in balance as much as possible, okay? Also understanding what is going on. So sometimes it seems like, gosh, they were having so much fun, or he really likes playing these games or whatever. We don't need to understand what some of the other causes are that may be happening during school, that by the time he gets home, he's got such a short fuse because he's been taxed almost too much. So he's kept it together all day at school. People have bumped into him. People have not talked to him. Math is hard, or history is hard, or whatever it is. So by the time I get home, boy, I have just about had it. So I would say, before we start talking about what we want to do, you definitely want to go through all of these things. The next thing is, when we talk about providing the child with the additional resources for dealing with the stressors, is we need to figure out ways for him to actually deal with this frustration. So a positive way of dealing with frustration. Now, some of that is a little bit more preventative. Some of it is understanding kind of state regulation. So what do how do I feel right before I get so frustrated, and what do I do in order to protect myself and others? So the idea would be, you know, he needs something that will alleviate that stress on a little bit more of a regular basis. Maybe a sensory diet. Maybe we need to really make sure that he's got a good exercise program. Maybe it's something that we need to make sure that he has something built into his day that's really structured in those after-school times, so that we're dealing with this, the kind of giving him as much support as we can at school and around language or whatever those other things are, but also recognizing that that school time is very, very difficult. And so I want to make sure that when he gets home, we've got something that is something that can help him reduce that stress. Now, if he breaks things or hits things and feels better, then oftentimes that is that proprioceptive input or that sensory input. So what I would recommend too is you know, you don't want to do it afterwards because it's too late, then it becomes reinforcing. But you know, a lot of heavy work, and sometimes that's weights, sometimes that's a punching bag, sometimes that's treadmill. A lot of physical activity will help with that, so that he gets that same kind of release prior to. Okay, I think it's also important, if you say that happens all the time and then he says he feels better afterwards, for him to work with something to start to identify when he feels like he's about ready to do that. The other thing is that you need to look at, again, it is reinforcing. Maybe it's internally reinforcing, but I'd like to, I think you also need to look at what happens. What do you do when he breaks something? What does his brother do? Does everything stop? Does the attention go back on him? I mean, it's hard not to comment on that when something is, you know, he breaks something and then he says, well, gosh, I was so frustrated and then I feel better. I mean, if you break something and you break it and it's loud, everyone's going to look. That's a lot of attention for bad behavior. So we want to provide that substitute behavior. So when you're frustrated, you walk away. Okay, you go to your room, you go to your punching bag, you go to whatever those things are. Okay, but you don't want to do it afterwards, after he's already broken something, because then you're reinforcing that. So we want it, when you're frustrated, the substitute behavior is you walk away, you give yourself a timeout. Okay? We want to then reinforce that positive behavior. So when we catch him, you know, using his language, or he says, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, or he's, you know, I know that it's difficult to do this when you're talking about an avoidant behavior, something like frustration around homework, but you have to sit down with the school or the therapist or whoever whomever you're working with to decide what the goal is here. So we need him to not break things, and we need him to not hit things, because that is something that will be dangerous to him. Okay, we talked about being one of the issues where we would change behavior if it's a danger to himself or others. Sounds like it is. Okay, so definitely want to sit down and say, okay, when we're going to give him a little bit more control, because he also sounds like he's taking a little of the control himself. So where can he have control? So if he tells us his stop word, his out phrase is I need a break, or whatever it is, that we respect that. Now we're gradually going to decrease the opportunities for that, and we're going to backward chain him into working on things a little bit longer. But that's a good way to give power back without having to use something that's physical means and or breaking something else. It is important to start in a controlled setting, so want to try any of these behavior plans. You want to work with the school, try it at school or first, or try it at home with some support. The main thing is to try, you don't want to try to use new techniques when you're out in public until you're they're pretty sound in your toolbox at home or at school. Then we want to provide opportunities for both success and failure. So not only do we want to give all of these antecedents, we want to create, ward off this. We want to have a natural consequence for it. If the child never realizes what the natural consequence is, because we've done such a good job maybe of manipulating the environment, etc., some point, okay, let's say we decrease as much frustration from this little guy that we've talked about as possible. And great, things are going great, and we haven't had any more breakage, and we haven't had any more punching. But you know what? Sometime he is going to get frustrated. So we're going to allow, in what we call, kind of a controlled burn or something like that, allow a little bit of frustration, because what we want to happen is for him to actually know that, yes, I did mean business, that, we've given you all these things, we want you to go, and you start to get frustrated, you go into your room, and you go to your punching bag, you get on the treadmill, whatever it is that we're going to do. But also, if you do blow it, then the natural consequence is going to be there. So even though I say to myself, shoot, this poor kid, he's such a great kid, and he's been working so hard, and he blew it, okay, still going to have the consequence that we set up from before. Okay? Hopefully that was a little bit more helpful. So this is kind of what we're starting to talk about, which is what do we do? How do we address the antecedents? I want to be clear about this. I think it's really, really, really important that we provide appropriate interventions both at school and home. So inclusion is really important. We want these guys to be with their typical peers as much as possible, and we want them to be successful there. RTI, and I have a whole presentation. I think that there's a big section on it in the presentation that I sent out before about RTI. I think that RTI is really important, particularly for this population, because I think that there are some good strategies and good interventions that can help the kids prior to oftentimes needing a full-blown IEP. So we want them to get the services, and I think it's also important, one of the things that we're doing with kids with Down syndrome and kids with Fragile X, kids with autism in particular, we do this, is to really look at academic supports that are appropriate and are geared towards building on the strengths of the child, not just things that are targeted at their weaknesses. So the example that I used about the child kind of holding it together all day and then coming home and really having that short fuse is not something that is uncommon. And part of that stems from the lack of academic or appropriate academic supports. Just making sure that somebody has an aide is not going to do it. Just making sure that they have more time to do their homework or whatever is not going to do it. So really looking at what those academic supports are. Even the kid that says, I don't care, I hate math, I hate school, whatever. The difference between a child that has appropriate academic supports and the child that doesn't is really night and day or as far as behavior goes.
Can you just define RTI, and then we can point the questioner to more information on that later?
Yes, absolutely. So RTI is response to intervention. So in 2004, the reauthorization of IDEA was moved away from what we call a test deficit place model into a response to intervention model. And I'll talk about the two things right now. So it used to be that the way that you qualified for an IEP is, or for any kind of, particularly around kids that have learning disabilities, and that's why I think it's so important for this group, is that you had to get to a certain point of failure before you qualified for those interventions. So what would happen is we would have kids who they would be evaluated, and they weren't at 25% delay, or they weren't at the 7th percentile, or whatever the criteria was used in that particular state or school district. And so let's say that the 7th percentile was the cutoff. You've got a kid that comes in and is functioning at the 11th percentile. Okay, well, it doesn't meet that criteria, and so he or she is not going to get the LD support that he or she needs, or is a year and a half behind rather than 2 years behind, or 2 grade levels behind in reading. So what happens is the kid goes back into the classroom, and then we essentially wait for them to get far enough behind in order to qualify for services. What happens with RTI is that we say, here's a kid that's not doing well. So what we're going to do is we're going to call, it's a tiered approach. And so the bottom tier are universal interventions. So what is good and what's best practice for all kids. The next level is, let's say that that's not enough. So we've got one of our guys and we say, he's doing pretty well in there, but he is really struggling in science. My goodness, and part of it's because there's so much reading and he's not able to keep up. So we say, well, we're going to try what's called a targeted approach with him, and that's a Tier 2 intervention. So Tier 2 interventions can be problem solving in nature. So we would say, well, what we're going to do with him, we're going to give him a little less homework, we're going to give him a buddy, we're going to have him do his books on tape, we're going to modify his homework assignments so that they're typed instead of whatever it is. Okay, so all of those kinds of things are Tier 2 interventions. The other way to look at it from a non-problem solving way for RTI is what's called standard protocol approach. And so what we would say is, this guy is struggling in science, but it's actually because he's not a good reader. And so any of our kids that are not good readers, it's not that we're going to try all these different things in our school. People that are having problems with reading or non-readers go immediately into a reading recovery approach, or we're going to use Reading Plus, or we're going to use whatever the reading approach is, and that's what we're going to do. That's our targeted approach. Now, the good thing about RTI is that, number one, you don't have to fail before you get support. Number two is that once you're placed into a targeted approach or a Tier 2 approach, there is a data collection process that is mandated. So different schools and different districts have different interpretations of this, so it might be 2 weeks, it might be 6 weeks, where that person, we're going to take data on the kid and see if he, quote unquote, responds to this new intervention. Okay, and that's what this is. Okay, we're going to try something, we're going to see if the kid responds. If he doesn't respond, we're going to go up the pyramid to a more intense kind of a thing. So sometimes it's an individualized approach, more of a pull-out on the top tier, Tier 3 intervention, or sometimes Tier 3 is actually considered an IEP. So that's what RTI is in a nutshell. I hope I understood that question. You can go to the presentation that I had, I think that's posted, that I gave to Jim before, has a section on RTI that is explained. You can Google it at any point and get information on it, and then also you can look at your own school district's interpretation and application of RTI. Most of them have it on their websites. Okay. Home issues, I think it's important to have clear and consistent rules and expectations, a lot of structure, and lots of predictability. Again, typically what we see is the less structured the activity, the more likely that we're going to have those behavior problems. Now sometimes you feel like, goodness gracious, the kid's been structured to death. He's structured all day in school, he's not going to do well, he needs a break. I'm not saying that he or she has to be working all the time. Structure means that it's predictable. So, you know, if you've got, you know, video games or whatever it is, and you're going to allow the child to do that for a while, that's great. But you want to have a schedule of how long, what's going to come next, when we're going to stop the video games. That's predictable in nature, because that's the way that we decrease some more of those behaviors from occurring. This is an example of ST Math. I encourage you to, there's a link on the other presentation that I have. It's a great math approach, and seems to be showing some promise for kids with learning disabilities around math. So when we look at our younger kids, the most important thing to think about for the 3-year-olds and the younger kids, elementary school age, but even younger for sure, is that I mean what I say. We have limited rules, limited threats. We follow through every time, and this is the worst thing, I think, and the hardest thing for being a parent, is that we follow through even when you think you might be wrong. So it's more, I know this is going to sound crazy, but it's true. So let's say that you you say to a kid, you know what, if you do that, you're going to, the rule is, we've got a plan, you threw the thing at your brother's head, and so you've lost it. Put it away. It's a pretty natural consequence. Not too technical. It's not too crazy or anything. And then you think, gosh, you know what? He's so tired and he's so young, and really so-and-so is kind of picking at him or whatever. If you say that you're going to do something, you need to follow through, because the hardest thing later on is to have a child who really doesn't believe you. So when you say you're going to, if you do that, you're going to be grounded. Hey, this is our plan. You have to do this. This is what we do. This is part of your routine. And then gosh, you blew it. You were out too late or whatever it was. Now you're grounded. If they think that you don't mean what you say, it's really hard to enforce anything, because there will be a lot more fighting afterwards and it'll wear you down. So it's really important at the beginning with younger kids that they understand that you mean what you say. It's also very important from a safety standpoint. I'm not going to go into too much detail about timeout. Timeout can be used effectively for young children. It is a big gun. It is really a punishment rather than a consequence, because it is time away from your attention. Our guys are social, and we are social beings generally. So if you use timeout, I think that there's a good long explanation of this particular approach in the handout around behavior that Jim has. And so the thing that's really important is that if you put someone, it's not a place, it's not the purple chair, it's not the corner, it really is time away from your attention. But the only way it's time away from your attention is if you don't talk to the child while they're in timeout. So if you've got a lot of repartee going on, I told you, and don't hit mommy, it makes me sad, look at my face, look how sad I am, you're in timeout, don't ever hit it again. Okay, that's not really timeout. That is really sitting in the purple chair and mommy talking to you. So timeout, in order to be very effective, really needs to be time away from your attention. I'll have to say that it is one of the most effective ways of dealing with aggression, unless the aggression is for avoidance or escape. So we don't use timeout with kids that have autism, because they're doing something to get out of it, and typically, and they're not motivated by social reinforcement typically, and so putting a child that's not motivated by that in timeout doesn't really work. We never use timeout for a behavior that its function is avoidance, because then the child, then it's reinforcing because they won. Okay, we're going to talk about adults a little bit more. Routine is super, super, super important, particularly once you get out of school. So I think we've got a couple people that may have transitioned out of school. School is good in that it certainly gives us a routine for our day. Sometimes our guys have trouble, getting jobs. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do great with jobs. Sometimes they need a little bit more support about that. But one of the things that's really important is to have a schedule, and to use technology, maybe the iPhone or an iPad, in order to track that schedule. It decreases anxiety. It increases predictability, and once you've increased predictability and decrease the anxiety, we're going to have a lot less problems around behavior. You need to develop a method to inform around transitions and those things that may come up. We want to allow adequate time to make transitions, and we need to maintain sometimes this sensory diet. Now, not all of your kids have sensory processing disorders, but if they do, we want to make sure that we've got more of this stuff in here than somebody that may need a little bit less. So sensory diet, working with an OT to do that. One of the things that I think is also important, and having teenagers that are in college or whatever and don't live here and don't eat here, excuse me, on a regular basis, certainly, is that I don't think that they eat at regular intervals and don't eat very healthy. And we certainly know that that can wreak havoc on our behavioral approaches and our mood. So if you can control that at all, we want to make sure that we're doing that. Critical components. When we look at, moving from young adulthood into transitioning out of school, these are the biggest issues. Now, I know that living arrangements and finances are big things, but when we're talking about behavior, work, job, making sure that there is some kind of counseling, be that social skills groups, one-on-one counseling, group counseling, whatever. These seem to be the things that make the biggest difference if you've got somebody who's dealing with a behavioral issue. The other thing is making sure that there is an outlet for leisure and hobby activities. Finding something that the individual enjoys and can get to and takes up some of their time is crucial. So when we see kids that and young adults that are able to, I'm not saying that they need to even have a job that's full-time, but a part-time job is oftentimes very, very effective, and then making sure that there's something that they can do with that leisure time that's enjoyable. Now, having said that this is an issue for young adults and adults, it is those of you that have younger kids, it's really clear that, boy, we need to start thinking about these kinds of things early on so that they've developed those habits and those interests beyond maybe what we like to do, but something that they can do and that they can do independently. There are interest inventories that we have and that can be used effectively to help find out what's a good match and what's not necessarily a good match. There are, we encourage people, of course, to use those available resources. Again, the technology, the iPad, iPod, the phones, etc., to help with either focus, schedule, you know, job-related tasks, whether they need some kind of assistance while they're on the job of how do I, you know, what do I do when I forgot what I'm supposed to do? When am I supposed to, iPads will have an alarm, so do phones, you know, okay, well, how do I make sure that I get back from my lunch break or my regular break on time, making sure that you're using technology to the best of your ability. These are some things that are, again, they're the issues that separate these. We did a little study about why kids with any kind of learning issue or developmental disability have difficulty with work. It's around these issues. These were the biggest things that were of issue. And so being aware of what they are is something that we want everyone to think about. But one of the things, I mean, some of the stuff is pretty obvious. You're like, okay, you know, you need to definitely take a shower, and we want, you know, some of our kids that have more issues with speech had more problems and things like that. This last one I think is really important and something that we often don't think about. So what has been a pattern all their lives in school and you know, as part of their, little bit a part of their learned behavior is sometimes I don't know what's going on, so I'll wait and I'll watch, or you know, I'll wait and I'll get home and I'll ask my mom because it's embarrassing to keep asking for, I don't understand this, or I don't remember this, or I need whatever. And so teaching our kids to ask for help when they need it and reinforcing that is a really positive thing and has big implications for vocational help later.
Dr. Riley, I've got a couple questions that are fairly complex, so I'm going to open the mics rather than try to relay them. First is Ginny. Ginny, are you there?
I think we're getting to the end of our time too, so I'll try to do this quickly. I can't hear.
I wondered if you could give another example of addressing a problem in a work setting. My son's very, very anxious because he's lost several jobs. But when he goes to a new position, he'll roll his eyes at the supervisor, he'll sigh, or he'll respond sort of, you know, whatever. It's, you know, not that he doesn't care, he really does care, but instead what he does is he acts like he doesn't. Outburst, but it's really self-destructive behavior. He's meeting with a new job coach, and I want to discuss the problem and possible, you know, way of dealing with it.
Okay, what I didn't hear the, I heard the he has trouble in the workplace, and then I didn't hear until you started saying it's really self-destructive, and so what does he do again? Can you talk a little bit louder?
Okay,
tell me what he does.
You can't see the chat that I put on?
Do I have a chat? Okay, let me see where that goes. Hold on a minute. Chat. Where would it be?
It would be in questions. And
oh, chat. Okay, let's see. Okay. RTI 2011 conference.
I know that.
No, I guess I can't see that.
Let me read it from the chat because.
Okay, great. I'm sorry I couldn't
bad.
hear the. I just can't hear all of it. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to mute Jenny and read. Wondered if you could give some concrete examples in a work setting. For instance, if my son is very anxious because he has lost several jobs, he will do things like rolling his eyes at a new supervisor, sighing and responding, whatever, as if he doesn't care. He does care.
Okay.
And I'll stop there. I think we've kind of overlapped now.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm sorry, Jenny. I just didn't hear those middle things. So the anxiety is such an issue, and so there are a couple things. It's great that it sounds like he has a job coach. One of the things that you know, I would I think getting out in front of it and talking about what those things are. So number one, you know, kind of getting the job coach to look at those specific behaviors. But I go back to the where, when, and how often that occurs, is that what I would really like to understand is when are those the comments like whatever, and is it because you know, is it lack of understanding of what's going on? Do we see that when he's not really clear? Do we see that when he gets corrected a little bit from his employer? Those are things I think that the job coach can watch for and target, because what we really want to do is to that substitute behavior. Number one, want to decrease his anxiety as much as possible. So we want to give all the tools around decreasing anxiety, schedules, what, you know, almost like over preparing him for, you know, if this happens, here's what you do. Lots of visual ways for dealing with that. So lots of schedules, lots of reminders. If he likes his phone, I think that's another way to have programmed in some text and some pages that will help with that. The other thing that can be really organizing, if they'll allow it, and I'm not sure where he's going to work, is to, if he can wear his headphones or listen to his iPod during some of his work. So sometimes what that allows, or even sometimes a book, or, you know, on tape or whatever it is, but what that does is kind of focus him on thinking about something other than, and I know this sounds silly at work, but other than his work. Because if he can get into a routine that is, he's doing something that hopefully doesn't require too much of taxing cognitive behavior, but maybe something that you know, he can relax a little bit. I would also have lots of scheduled breaks in there. Anxiety is often, you know, exacerbated by fatigue, and then the thing about the eye rolling, and the eye rolling is a tricky one to kind of deal with, because oftentimes people don't know that they're doing it. But what I'd really like to see is when that happens, and then the job coach to teach him. I do understand that idea that he gives the appearance of not caring when he really does care, but that the job coach can really talk about when your boss says this, you say this. And it's almost like we've learned these kind of packed phrases. Those packed phrases make a huge difference. Okay, so rather than saying, and it can be that can be even kind of a stall tactic. Like if you don't know what your boss is saying, and you say whatever, or something like that. If it really is that you don't understand, say okay, or all right, I'll try to do that, or we'll give him whatever kind of a phrase. Let him organize himself so that the anxiety about being instructed or scolded or redirected or whatever the appropriate verb is there by the supervisor or by the boss, let him calm down a little bit, and then go back and talk to the boss about getting clarity about what he needs to do or what he hadn't done. So buying some time away from the anxiety-producing situation can really make a big difference. Now, if some of that anxiety also is related to sensory issues, then again, we want to make sure that he's got all of those resources available, and things that technology like headphones and deep pressure and that kind of thing. I hope that answered that question.
I have one other, and it's from Carolyn. I'm going to open her mic, but I'm not sure she can connect. So the question is, where can an interest inventory be found?
Oh, yeah, that's great. you know, we have them at the Children's Hospital. We did a research project on that. Um, I think that you can find them online. We bought an interest inventory. Most job coaches have them. Jim, will you? I'll see if I can remember the actual titles of some of the ones that we used in our interest inventory study, and maybe I can send some links back out to Jim on that.
Sounds good.
Okay. Counseling. So we're going to move. I think we're kind of over our time, so I'm going to try to go through a little quickly because I know you guys have other things to do tonight. So. Sexuality, and these are things to talk about as far as within counseling. And so sexuality in really important. Reading social cues. This is back to and this frustration and anger. The sexuality issue is a different one, but it can be lumped into this about reading the social cues. But as far as employment and frustration, oftentimes number 2 and number 3 are the things that really get us in trouble. Now, counseling does a great job with that, and group counseling is probably the best way to deal with that because it's harder to recognize a behavior in yourself. It's much easier to recognize it in someone else in a non-threatening and coming from someone other than your parent. So a counselor and then a group. And group, what we've noticed certainly with our boys and girls groups is they're a little bit more brutal than we are, but it actually does change the behavior much more quickly, and that they are able to recognize what has been interfering. Doesn't always mean that they can change that behavior really, really quickly, but they are able to recognize what is being talked about when someone says, you seem, you know, you're disinterested, or you seem you're rude, or you're being disrespectful, and having someone else kind of show that to them and then being able to discuss it really makes a big difference. Leisure time, I talked about this a little bit. I think what's really important, and again back to those younger kids, is trying to find things that are enjoyable from a leisure perspective that are not so taxing physically. So horseback riding and fishing and painting and cards and those kinds of things, what we tend to think about, particularly when we live here in Colorado, is that, you know, leisure time should be spent in some big, you know, extreme sport or in a competitive situation. Now, I'm not saying that competitive sports are bad. I think they can be very, very good, but they have a short shelf life. And for our guys, sometimes the frustration and the anxiety associated with those, particularly around, you know, those gross motor skills that may not work as well as some other kids skills do, it just doesn't seem to be a very positive thing. So finding those things that are a little, you know, can take up some of that time, but also are a match that, you know, typically are done more around other people, but are not team sport kinds of things. I think that therapeutic riding programs, if you can, or even just horseback riding kinds of activities, are great. They're great for kids that have issues around anger, because you can't be angry around the horse. You have to be calm, and it's really a lesson in understanding how to take some other entity's perspective, and I think that we've had some really good success there. The deep pressure aspect of even just getting the horse ready to ride is a good sensory activity in and of itself. Quickly, so what do we do when that behavior occurs? So we're trying really hard to address all those antecedents first, and now let's talk about for a few minutes the what we do once they do. So the idea of these are the R's, and I'm not going to read all of them, but what this realizing and recognizing is really important. We talked about it a little bit before. Labeling, even when it's, I know it sounds silly and people hate it, okay, I know you're frustrated, you are really frustrated, you're angry, you know, those kinds of things. They need to be able to do that, not dissimilarly to when we talked about the little guy who was breaking things, of because when we change the behavior, part of that's going to be when you feel frustrated. So I need to understand that this equals frustration. This equals anger. Whatever it is, you need to be able to label that. We want the person to be able to start to learn to remove himself from the situation, not as a punishment. So self-removal is different than timeout. Timeout, again, is time away from your attention, and you put the kid in timeout and you take the kid out of timeout. Removal is, and we have to respect this, if we're going to use it as a means for non-aggression, okay, and keeping people safe, everyone safe, is you're frustrated, it seems like you may need to go to your room. You're not sending them to your room, or you may say to yourself, I'm frustrated, I'm going to my room. We're not going to have this fight anymore. I'm getting angry, I'm going to go into my room. You're getting angry, go in your room, and when you can, you know, we'll talk about this later. We want people to understand that everybody gets mad. Everybody gets frustrated, and these guys have more reasons sometimes to get frustrated than we do. But so we want them to learn, not that you storm out and get in the car and run out in the street or anything like that, but that you say, I need a break, I need to remove myself from this situation, and then I will come back and we will talk about it. Figure out activities that he or she finds relaxing, or I always do that on a habit, but in this group we don't need to. What allows the child to relax? So reading a magazine, listening to music, what he likes to do, what he finds relaxing. Okay, and he should have these options available in his room, particularly if you're going to ask him to go to his room in order to relax. Okay, refocusing. They should have something that allows him to then, okay, I've relaxed, and then I want to get back into being able to be neurologically organized, particularly around sensory issues. So swinging, biking, going for a walk, going on a treadmill, and now I'm ready to come back and rejoin the group. All right? And a walk is a great thing. Now, I have this on here for a reason. There are a couple of reasons when, probably many of the guys have video games in their rooms. I know that is a big deal. We want to play video games. It is oftentimes a means for relaxation. Typically, we would not recommend something like Call of Duty for relaxation. And I know that some parents have even said, well, there is no Call of Duty, there are no games like that in our house, we're not going to do that because we already have enough problems with fighting and aggression. On some level, I agree with that. The other thing, though, and I think that there's this balance to it, is that, back to one of my really early slides, is we want them to develop those social relationships. So if, it's great when FIFA is the video game of choice where everybody wants to play FIFA and it's not so violent, and yay, go in your room, play a little FIFA, and come back out. When Call of Duty or some of those other games are more of what's going on with the peer group, I'm not telling you to break any of your own rules, but what I'm saying is you also want to not exclude them to the point that they can't interact with their peers, and that they are, we want them to have some of those shared language activities. All right, you're going to need one more R. So those were the things that we want them to be able to do. One of the things that's going to all of these things take some time, and you want to develop this plan with someone else. So what happens when they get frustrated? We've already talked about how we're going to try to address all of these antecedents before, but we want to create this plan so that when they do lose control, when they do get frustrated, that they have an appropriate means for dealing with that frustration. It doesn't happen the first time. I'm not going to tell you that it's terribly easy. However, this approach does work. It can be very effective once it has gotten into kind of, again, to use another R, the repertoire of everyone in the family. So you understand what this is, the goal that you have for your son. We all agree that this is the best way so that things don't get broken, nobody gets hit, and nobody gets hurt. But it does take some time. I think that we've had, you know, within a few months. Now, if you've got somebody that gets frustrated more easily, the only good thing about that is that you have more opportunities to practice it in a shorter amount of time. So our kids that have had more anxiety and more frustration, when we've addressed these, use the 3 R's, as well as making sure that we're addressing those antecedents and providing those support services, we have seen a more rapid adoption of this kind of an approach, and much more of the decline of the aggression has been much more rapid. Now, for those kids that rarely do this, you know, sometimes you don't get a lot of times to practice it because it just doesn't come up. You can, you know, those kind of silly guys that are, you know, well, when you get real mad, I want you to go in your room, and they're like, you know, okay, and they skip off, and they don't really have too many problems with that. I don't think that those are the people that are listening to this particular phone call, but that's what we're dealing with. Last thing I'm going to say is that you need to understand your own scale. So the things I was just talking about is that these things don't change overnight. Changing behavior is not easy. And scientifically, we know that behavior gets worse before it gets better. So you've changed the rules up. Okay, things were going along in a predictable way, and again, the behavior did not continue because it wasn't reinforcing. It continued because it was somehow reinforcing. And if you change that up, it's confusing, it's anger-provoking, it's frustrating. Okay, and when we see those behaviors, we will see those behaviors escalate because we're going to turn up the volume and try to do what we were doing before to a greater degree to see if we're going to, you know, if I'm breaking one thing and nobody's looking at me, I'm going to break a couple more because that's what used to work. Okay, so that's called an extinction burst. It also shows that it's working because it's a change. You've changed the rules. And it's not a malicious thing on the part of the kid. It's a, wow, I like the way things were before. That was how we were operated, and it was comfortable to me. Okay, understand the trade-offs. These are time-consuming. Okay, but on the other hand, the strategies that I've talked to you about do work. They've worked with other kids. They're in other books. I've used them. I developed them. I use them myself, and I will tell you that they do work. However, that's why I say when we go, when we look at those 5 questions of whether it's something a behavior that we really want to change. We've been talking for, you know, a couple of hours, so it's hard work to kind of conceptualize, and it's hard work to do, but it does work, and oftentimes it's very, very necessary so that we can keep everybody safe in our home. The last thing is that you don't want to change, you don't need to, and you don't want to change everything now. We want to look at what is the most important thing to change, what's most salient for us, and then how do we move forward. So I hope that you don't get off the phone call or get off the webinar and go feel like you have to change everything now. The other thing, and I'll say, I've said this a couple of times, and I'm going to say it again, is I think that you really want to look at getting someone, if you want to create a behavior plan, that you want to do it in conjunction with a therapist. You want, or the teacher, someone that can give you the support that you need in order to be effective at addressing those behaviors. All right, we've got maybe a couple of minutes.
So I have a question that's been patiently waiting. Christine
Okay.
asks, my 5-year-old, this one makes me chuckle, my 5-year-old will get mad and yell if his friends don't play the way he wants to play, or he will storm off and pout and call them over to come to him.
Okay. Some of that is, and it's a good question because it shows some of the things that, and I probably should have said this earlier on, but sometimes we want to, if we've got a child with a known issue, sometimes we attribute all things to having Klinefelter's, having Down syndrome, having Fragile X, whatever it is. It's not terribly uncommon for 5-year-olds to want people to play with them the way that they want to be played with, and so stumping off until people want to do what you want them to do is not terribly uncommon. What is important is that the only good thing about that usually is that other 5-year-olds are not typically very good at accommodating other people. So adults may go over to someone and say, oh, what's the matter, whatever. Other 5-year-olds might just not play with you. Now, that makes that behavior pretty non-reinforcing pretty quickly, because if you really want to play, then you kind of sometimes learn how to play with other people. What's important and what I would recommend for that when you observe that happening is sometimes you want to let it play out a little bit, because kids will get mad pretty quickly and get over being mad pretty quickly. But what we do want to see is why he is getting frustrated with them not playing the way that he wants them to play. Sometimes, if that has an anxiety component, if it is that he has to always be in control, sometimes we have bossy kids, and that's one thing. Sometimes we have kids that lose control when things can't go, don't go exactly the same way. So somebody moves the toy, moves the cup, moves things out of line, moves the train track, and it blows up in their faces. If we start to see kids lose friends because of that, number one, we need to look at working with someone around that. Number two, we really need to talk to the child and try to figure out, one, if they cognitively have the awareness to say, why is it not okay? You know what? Sometimes when we're playing with each other, we need to let Bobby needs to get to be the boss sometimes, and kind of almost force those situations. But all of that is really a continuum of being, having more obsessive kinds of behaviors, anxiety, so much anxiety over control that we can't play, versus, and I'm not in that situation all the time, so I'm not exactly sure. You'll have to kind of figure that out for yourself, from where the child falls, versus kind of a periodic, he's a little bit bossy, he likes people to do what he likes to do. Sometimes he's a little more fatigued, or with this one kid he can't do it. Also kids play differently with different kids. Although we want them to be able to play with a variety of kids, if you have a child that your kid just can't play with, unless it's a sibling, which you're going to have to then figure something else out, again, decrease the opportunities for those bad behaviors to manifest, which is he doesn't play with that kid. I mean, sometimes it's just not worth the headache.
Christine, your mic is open. Does that cover it?
Well, and I understand what you're saying, but for instance, one of the instances is on the playground with his classmates. I see how he reacts and acts, and I don't see his classmates, acting the same way. He definitely, at least to me, stands out as acting differently than the other kids, and I guess it's at the point now where I'm afraid that he's going to be kind of alienated because he's been doing this for a while now at the playground, and the kids don't come over to him and say, hey, what do you need, most of the time, and so he sits there for 15 minutes. Bill calling, Isabel, come over here. Isabel, come over here, and it doesn't stop. And so I can see, maybe not so much right now at this age, but if it continues, him being really alienated.
So what do you do?
I've just told him, I said, Zachary, you need to play the way they want to play, or play with someone else that wants to play your way. But it's not helping by you pouting like this.
Mm-hmm. Do you go over while he's still pouting?
Sometimes I do, yeah.
So there are a couple of things. Number one, I would look at again try to give him some of those resources for things that without seeing it all, it's hard to give a whole bunch of advice, but making sure that you go through that whole behavior plan of exploring what he needs. So he may not have the words that he needs in order to do the things that he wants to do, or he can't label them, or he can't access them, or whatever it is. So I would look at that. I would look at who the kids are that he's playing with. But here's the thing. Pardon me?
I'm sorry, that was my computer.
Oh, okay. If you go over there, that's attention as well.
Right, and I'm reinforcing it.
Right. So he pouts, and then they don't come, but you come, and you say, well, did you say his name is Zachary? Well, look, it's, you want to play with those kids, you need to do this, it's really important, all that kind of stuff. It's lots of language, that's lots of attention. And so, number one, I would talk to his teacher and see what goes on at school. I would see what goes on in other kinds of situations, see how pervasive this is. And then, look at the anxiety thing, look at what kinds of resources he needs to be in order to be successful. Is he alienating people because he, can't communicate what he wants, or are his play skills so rigid that nobody else can play? Those are really things to look at and have, the teacher look at, or who else is working with him. And then I think you want to think about how you're going to do that. Number one, are we going to help him, give him more support so that he can be effective with them? Or are we going to, if it's just naughtiness and there aren't those other things, then we're going to let some of that stuff play out a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I think it looks like we're at 8 o'clock, so I had promised that we would be done by 7:30, but
well,
we
got
did start a little bit later.
A little bit late start, and
yeah.
I don't see any other questions in the queue, so I think that brings this webinar to a close. And I really want to thank you. This was outstanding, as all your presentations are.
Well, thank you. It was great. I feel a little weird. I'm sorry that I couldn't see you, but I hope that if you have other questions that they can either be answered through this, or if you need something, you can certainly, Jim knows how to get in touch with me, and we can try to hook you up with answering those specific questions.
So I think that brings it to a close. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate all of you attending, and we'll have the recording available as soon as possible, and there will be an email announcement letting you know when it's available.
Thank you.